So we have Chris, right? Yep. And as I mentioned, we'll share with you Chris's outstanding keynote from a couple years ago later on the group WhatsApp chat. We invited you back because you were so good, Chris. That just goes to show you were the wrap-up speaker a couple years ago. And when we got back in touch this week, because we stay in contact with all of our alumni. And sure enough, you had set up a new company. You're doing all sorts of same location, new company, very relevant. And so, would you please welcome Chris Richardson?
Thank you, Julie. And it is, in fact, a pleasure to be back here in Kea. As always, it's a great group of people and a wonderful location. And I thank you for putting it all together and for inviting me. I have a little bit of a problem. So Julie asked me to come tell the story, and all of you are out here telling your story, and that's great. But to tell a story, you kind of have to give a name to the hero of the story, if you will. And that's easy when you're writing stuff in the third person. I could tell a story about Julie and call her a visionary, but I can't call myself a visionary. No, but that doesn't work at all. And like sometimes you have a very clear sort of self-understanding, right? Jack can call himself a lawyer, even though I might call him a VC. Like he's a lawyer, he comes up and tells his story. I'm no good at this. Probably the best thing to do is what Kimberly just did. Say, other people say about me, I'm a super connector. I don't want to tell you what other people say about me. We can't have that. So if you've met me in the last 24 hours, I've probably been telling you I'm a technologist. And that's not the greatest thing because nobody knows what that means. But let me explain a little bit by what I mean by that. And Jack actually reminded me of a lot of things that sort of led me to where I am today. And a big part of it is just the accident of birth, having been born in the right year to the right set of parents that caused me to grow up in a time and place where when I was 9 years old, a little box showed up on my table at home labeled Televideo TS802 with a flashing white dot in the corner. And that was a computer at the time. And unlike my kids who get introduced to computers by getting an iPad or an iPhone where you just do stuff and it works, this was a flashing dot. And if you wanted to figure out how to make it work, good luck. You just had to figure out how to make it work. So we started there. A few years later, my mom, who was a kindergarten teacher, decided she was going to change careers and she went back to school to become a nurse. If you went to university in the 1980s, you had to take a computer science course as a mandatory requirement. And my mom came to me in 1981 and said, Christopher, can you help me with this thing? And so she hauled me down to Eastern Michigan University as a 10-year-old kid, and we went into this big glass room that Jack showed you a picture of. And the next thing I know, I'm helping mom punch cards that we can feed into the machine to have Fortran do stuff that I don't know why it does these things. And yeah, so just by being born at that right time and place, it kind of naturally came to me that technology was just part of my life and really deeply understanding bits and bytes and how computers work. And so by the 1990s, I was in a position where I was actually working with the Internet Society and with NATO and traveling around the world helping developing countries build and get connected to the internet. Countries like Uzbekistan and Cuba, and how do you actually make this internet thing work? 99, I ended up being a guest professor at St. Petersburg State University in Russia, teaching multicast routing. So, I have some cred as a technologist, I think. I know some technology things. And then in February 2000, for a story that I'll tell over dinner or something, I ended up starting my first technology company. And for those of you who recall, March 2000, something big happened in the world of technology. And so February 2000 might have not been the easiest time to start a tech startup. But nevertheless, I survived and spent the next decade in Silicon Valley and a small series of what we call singles in the Valley. Successful startups where nobody got rich, but the VCs all got their money back, and I could still call up Dick Kramlich at NEA, and he'll still take my calls, and life's good. And then I moved to Europe and spent the last decade, up until the pandemic, traveling around the world helping tech companies be better at being tech companies. My sort of internal marketing tagline was, I'll help you out of zero. You're $1 million in revenue, we'll take you to 10. Your 10 will take you to 100. But it's rarely about actually the revenue. It was really about how to operate the company. And it was stuff that if these companies had existed in Silicon Valley, they'd go down to Hobie's in Palo Alto and go in the morning and get a cupcake and, oh, sorry, not cupcake, get a muffin, and ask 3 people what to do about whatever the problem is, and they would get an answer. But the rest of the world doesn't work that way. Not only do you not have the density of knowledge, you don't have the willingness to share the knowledge. And so if you show up in Prague or Melbourne or London or Bucharest or wherever, you can ask those questions all day long, but most people don't know the answer, and the people who do aren't going to tell you. So that brings me up to the pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, I did a lot of things that a lot of other people did during the pandemic. I got really good at baking bread. Like, I am a master baker now. So maybe I should say baker instead of technologist. No, not that, not that. Because I'm American and because I'm a man, I also like things on fire and outside. So I started doing cowboy sorts of stuff and seeing, maybe I could just make dinner on the barbecue. It doesn't have to be barbecue. I can make a stew on the barbecue or something. By the time I met Julie in October, was it, of 2020, I'd getting a little crazy. I was like, maybe I could put a whole pumpkin on the coals in the barbecue. Like, how's that going to cook up? So I was a little, free of mind during the pandemic, shall we say. And while I do, and did for the last 24 hours refer to myself as a technologist, what I'm actually trained in, because by the way, I never had a single computer science class ever, let alone an engineering class. What I'm actually trained in is in mathematics and philosophy. And so I prefer to think of myself as a philosopher. And that's good because it's not a destination, right? It's a great Greek word. It means lover of wisdom. It doesn't mean I have wisdom, or I know better than that, but I seek it out and I question things and I try to improve all the time. And I do hope you go look at that keynote that I gave 2 years ago that Julie will share, because it really was the culmination of about 8 years of thinking on the giant problem we are about to face as humanity in terms of what the success of capitalism has caused for us. And I think we're at this precipice where things are either going to go very, very poorly, or if we solve the problem, go very, very well. And as a philosopher, I don't get to just be an academic and think about things. You have to actually live the philosophy. You have to do something about it. So what Julie didn't know at the time of that presentation was that the month before, I had started a new company. And me and 2 partners had been looking over the course of the pandemic at what was going on in the EU in terms of regulation of digital assets. So the European Union, like every other governmental organization in the world, was looking at Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and initial coin offerings and NFTs and all of these things and saying, what do we do with this? We got to regulate this somehow, write some regulations. We're a government, that's what we do, regulate. But when we looked at the way the EU in particular was writing the regulations, what we recognized was that they were writing them very generically. They were just writing them about digital assets without actually specifying what a digital asset was. What makes something? A photograph is a digital asset on my phone. What's a digital asset? Anything could be a digital asset. And we also, me and my 2 partners, having been technologists for a long time, sort of broadly aware of what was going on in the industry, had been looking at what the neobanks were doing. And if you haven't heard the term neobanking, I'm sure many of you have, but perhaps some of you haven't, it's this phenomenon that's been going on for 7 or 8 years where these companies come along and they don't get a banking charter, or whatever the equivalent is in your country, but they build sort of a technology stack that lets them make a fully digital bank. And as part of that stack, they incorporate partnerships that give them the regulatory authority to make it act and behave like a bank. And so these are companies like Revolut or TransferWise or whatever that are radically transforming the shape of retail banking. They're doing amazing, amazing stuff. And what we did was we took those 2 pieces of information, the playbook of the neobanks and the way the EU was regulating digital assets, and put them together and created what we call a neo investment bank. Basically, we built the world's first fully digital end-to-end investment banking platform, where we go all the way from deal structure to securitization to custody to paying agent to sell side in a fully digital pipeline with no intermediary, no paper. We issued the world's first digital bond at the end of last year. It was a bond for a 15 million pound real estate deal, paid 7% fixed interest. And that's kind of what we did. Now, that's the description of what we did, but the question is, why does anybody care? And the answer is, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares that we're a digital investment bank. Nobody cares that we're a neo. Nobody cares that these assets are digital. None of that matters one whit. But what does matter is what it lets us do. Because when any industry is transformed in this way, where you remove the intermediary steps and you make it a fully digital delivery mechanism, it does two things. It speeds things up and it reduces costs. And when you speed things up and reduce costs, what that lets you do is not necessarily go defeat the incumbents. I'm not going off and knocking on Goldman Sachs's doors and finding who their customers are and going after them. What it lets you do is go play in niche markets where the incumbents can't play. And for us, that's the SME sector, small and medium enterprises. And small and medium enterprises, the ability, I guess I already talked through this without putting the fancy picture up. So fully digital pipeline, we do everything all digital. Got that part? I'll just skip it again in terms of time of speed. Small and medium enterprises are interesting because they're the backbone of the economy, right? Scott was talking earlier about sort of the relationship between public markets and valuation and GDP, but the majority of GDP, in many cases, the vast majority of GDP, isn't reflected in the public markets at all. I mean, right here in Greece today, 63% of GDP is generated by companies under 250 employees, not publicly listed at all. And in most of the developed world, that number is somewhere between 50 and 70%. So the economy is off there running. The vast majority of the economy, well over half, not available in the public markets, not open to regular investors, and quite frankly, not able to raise capital for growth. Because if you think about what it means to be a small business and a private business, okay, if you're a technology company, if you're a tech startup, you can go the venture capital route and you can raise seed funds or angel funds or whatever. And if you're at the high end of that spectrum and you have good assets on book, you can go the traditional banking route and you can borrow against your existing assets and go do whatever it is you want to do. But for the vast majority of these people, they're sitting in the middle. They're not tech startups. They're not unicorn or decacorn stories. They are good, growing, successful businesses, but no retail bank is going to come and lend them 40, 50, 60% of their annual revenue to go do a growth story. Like, that doesn't exist. And that's what we enable. So to give a couple examples of the kind of things we're talking about, and by the way, these are all real deals that we're doing today. So we have a company in Peru that owns 30% of the Brazil nut export market from Peru, and 5% of the global Brazil nut market. Nobody knows anything about Brazil nuts, but that's a big share. They're selling hundreds of millions of pounds of Brazil nuts to Tesco alone. And they want to go raise $20 million to expand their business. Their headquarters in Singapore, their factories in Peru, they sell to London. Like, this is not the kind of thing that a bank can deal with. And it's only $20 million. So it's not the kind of thing that Goldman Sachs can deal with because they can't even go do the due diligence on a deal that small. They could go the private equity route, but private equity is hard, right? The PE guys, many of you in this room, like, you could do that deal, but you're going to want like a 15% return on capital to do it. And it's going to take you 6 months to do the research and set up an SPV and get all the lawyers involved and figure out how we move the money around from wherever country you're in to wherever they're domiciled and make it all work. For us, the cost is almost nothing, and we can do that deal that fast. Like, literally almost instantly, once the due diligence is done. So what this enables us to do is take these deals and provide capital to really successful businesses that want to grow their business, and at the same time connect those capital requirements with a class of investors on the other side that is really missing out. So we have these SMEs that need capital and are doing exciting things or would like to be doing exciting things. And on the other side of the equation, you have this whole world of what Bain calls the mass affluent, right? All of us in here who are not actually rich, right? The people making six-figure incomes, they've got $1 million or $2 million in the bank, they feel wealthy, They can write a 10, 20, 50K check to invest in kind of anything, but they can't write a €500,000 or €1,000,000 check to get into a 15% return hedge fund. Like they just can't play with the rich kids, but they want to. They feel rich. They want better access to stuff than they can get in the public markets. And so in the private markets, for those professional and sophisticated investors, for which the bar is pretty low in Europe and the UK, we can offer the kind of return that up until today they only dream of. So going back to that real estate bond, if I'm the kind of guy sitting in the UK where I can write a 20K check, I'm a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, the CEO of my small business. If I wanted to invest in something today, I can invest in the stock market. I can invest in a REIT in the stock market and get real estate returns of around 4.6% average over the last 5 years. Or that's about it. That's really my only option. I can invest in crypto and then deal with the volatility. And I might get a great return, but it might also go to zero. That real estate bond was 90% occupied existing property. So no build problems, no permitting problems. It's already occupied. It's low-income housing, so 60% of the rents are guaranteed by the UK government and get paid directly to the landlord. It's hard to think of something that is more stable as an investment than that. And we were paying 7% fixed return. So if you're that investor sitting in the UK, that 7% return is pretty magical. You would be lucky to get 2 or 3% on anything that stable. Otherwise, you might be able to invest in. And there's a wide range of opportunities like this across a wide range of risk-reward profiles. So Brazil nuts, real estate in the UK, a couple other projects that we're doing now, end of lease life passenger aircraft conversion to cargo aircraft. Now that's a little bigger deal than we normally do. Our sweet spot is really sort of 5 to 50 million is most of the deals that we do. That one's about 200 million, and we've done a few as small as 3. But really, that SME space, 5 to 50, is kind of where we're focused. And providing that connection between the investors that have cash on the sideline that want to play and want access to these deals but can't otherwise get it, and well-run, established, successful companies that want to grow but don't have any access to capital. And we're often doing this today. I mean, we've done about 30 million US in deals so far, where we have another 20, 25 active right now. And we've got about $500 million of deals in the pipeline. So this is off and successfully working. Is that a slide? What happened? There we go. So where do we go from here? That's already, to me, a great story. I'm having more fun than I've had in a very long time. Having spent 25 years as a technologist, actually getting in and working with real businesses, doing real things with real stuff, whether that's nuts or underwater drones or aircraft or whatever, is this is fun for me. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm having a good time out there. But it's really just the beginning of what we're trying to build here. And what we're really doing is we're building rails. We're connecting parts of the market that couldn't talk to each other before. And sometimes that's just very local stuff that's inhibited by regulation. So for example, in the EU, if you want to set up your own venture capital fund in, say, Romania, you could do that, but it would cost you a lot of money. It would take you a lot of time. You'd publish a bunch of documents legally required to be in Romanian, and then you would have a very hard time getting any money from any investors anywhere else in the world. We've actually already had several VCs come knocking on our door and say, "Hey guys, can we use this thing you've built? Because we have companies and we have investors, we have LPs, but we don't want to build another fund. Can we just plug them together?" And the answer is, yeah, we could totally do that on our platform. Everything's fully regulated. The securitization vehicle's in Luxembourg. You give us the private placement memorandum, and boom, off we go. We'll securitize your thing, and you sell it to your LPs, and you're all good. Bob's your uncle. But it goes well beyond that. It's when we start talking about, okay, so the democratization of finance, it's all well and good that I can provide this to the mass affluent. But what I really want is I want to provide it to everybody. And so how do I get this to the Robinhood investors of the world? How do I let them invest in something that's, maybe not so crazy, but really provides a great return and give them access to these deals? And so our next play, if you will, is to take these digital assets, which, by the way, they're fully digital, but they're not tokens. They're literally just traditional securities, equities, bonds, notes, debentures that never have a piece of paper behind them. They're fully digital, the entire pipeline. The next step is to take those and connect them to tokens and plug them into the digital exchange world and start letting all of these securitized exchanges that are starting to build up around the world, but which lack deal flow, they lack product of real securities to sell, and therefore lack liquidity because they don't have anybody to come into where there aren't enough deals, and push these tokens out to the retail market and let them handle that side of it. Yeah, I think that's where we are. In terms of immediate next steps, I think the next big thing you'll see out of us is in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're actually going to open up in the US, because right now we're only available to, well, to any investor anywhere in the world, unless your passport says US or you live in the US. but very soon we will have US open, like I said, about 4 to 6 weeks. And it's interesting because that's important from a couple perspectives. Right now we can do deals in the US. If our business in the US that needs financing, we can do that. But Scott was talking about market sizes earlier, and the US represents about 15% of global GDP. Not a small number. But it represents 45% of global debt and 45% of global equities and 40% of every major asset class. Like all the investors in the world, half the investors in the world are playing in the US. So it's a big deal from getting the investor side of things into the equation, but it's also big from an institutional side. And when we start looking at, this is great from that mass affluent investor perspective because they can write those 5, 10, 20K checks. But if I'm a family office, I don't want to write a check that small. I want to write a $2, $3, $4 million check or a $10 million check or whatever. And if I have an institution, I don't even want to write a check that small, but I still want to play with all this stuff. I want access to the SME space. I want access to these alternative assets. And by the way, these are all assets. They're actual physical things, whether it's Brazil nuts or land or submarines or aircraft or whatever. And the beauty of being a physical thing is that it's pretty inflation resistant. Like if everything's getting more expensive, your assets are getting more expensive. And we're not securitizing debt in a company or equity in a company. We're securitizing ownership of the actual asset. You buy one of our submarine bonds, that bond represents 0.2% ownership of a fleet of submarines. When submarines get more expensive, they get sold later, you get paid. So the institutions really want access to this sort of inflation-resistant alternative asset stuff as well. And we have some plans to make that as available that I don't really want to get into yet. Let me get the US live first, but it's coming. I think that's it. We'll wrap up there and take questions.
That's great. And we're going to be hearing from Doug in a little while, and I think that's going to be really complementary to some of the thoughts there. Any questions for Chris? You got Richard, you got Kevin? Yeah?
You got the other microphone? Yeah. So these get caught on tape for the permanent record.
Hey, so are you providing a secondary market for what you're issuing as well, or is it just the primary issuance?
No, we are. So it's immediately tradable on the platform. I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention it's one of the benefits of doing this fully digitally, and particularly for sort of the family office space and the MFOs and high net worth individuals that can do these deals on their own today. If I want to go out and fund like one of our deals that's live right now is a clean tech solution for the world's highest power, high-powered lasers for cleaning industrial facilities, which is a much better solution than using all the caustic chemicals that are available today. They're not a crazy tech startup because they're not a tech startup. They've been around 10 years. They just happen to be part of a Korean conglomerate that didn't let them to sell to anybody other than conglomerate and now spun them out, and so they don't have any revenue. So that sort of opportunity as a private equity investor you can go do, but then you're locked into that business until you sell that business. With us, you do that deal, and okay, maybe you're going to make slightly less money, but you're going to do it much faster, and it's immediately tradable. You want to sell 10% of your position tomorrow? You can sell 10% of your position tomorrow. Now, of course, there are questions of how liquid is the market, and to be completely frank, the market is not liquid at all today. But it will facilitate any transactions that need to happen. So if somebody's in a deal, they want to get out, we'll find our partner, and they can sell the securities and move them today. And we're building up liquidity pools to make that a sort of more transparent and easier transaction until the point where these securitized exchanges really get up and running. And I don't know if that's 6 months or a year or 5 years or when that happens, but it's going to happen. And we have a path to liquidity until they get there.
So is it? Perhaps I wasn't listening properly. Is the secondary price set? Is it market rates? Is it?
Yeah, I mean it's whatever you sell for. Absolutely, market rates. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Hi, thanks. Really enjoyed that because obviously it's so obvious that you get it and you understand, and it's exactly what Doug and I have been trying to sort of get across for the last sort of 3 years. And I think the adoption of tokenization is going to be huge, right? And we're just right at the very forefront of it. I'm more of a statement because you talked about the doctors and the high net worths that are accredited investors or, Reg D type investors. And then you mentioned about how do we get that to the Robin Hood investors and I'm wondering how you see that if you're regulated, how you're going to fight for those people. Because I could be a nurse, right? And I can go and take all my money and I can put my wages on blackjack, right? And I can go and spend my money in a casino. But there's rules and regs around how I'm allowed to invest that money, investing in companies and startups, because of the drive for regulation. And I think that tokenization is supposed to put the power back into the decentralized, the banks, and put the money put the power into the actual investor to choose what he wishes to put his money into. How do you see that you can then take that to the next step? So this is available to everybody, that everybody can invest in an SME, like they do on Crowdcube, or these funding platforms, P2P. But how do you see the next step?
Yeah, I think there's a couple parts from our perspective, some of which are regulatory and some of which are technical. To take the asset that we have and connect it to a securitized token that's then available is it's easy to do in a single chain, but to do it in a multi-chain sort of way that we can make it available to everybody is kind of a technical problem because there aren't any standards around this yet, as I'm sure you well know. And then there's the regulatory question of, okay, what does that token actually represent? It's a security of an underlying security. Effectively, it's a derivative. And so what documentation do you have to have on that derivative to make it available to the retail investor? And quite frankly, this is where we start talking about Rails again and how we connect public and private markets. Because I think there's some things we can do, and I'm happy to have these discussions offline because we're very much in sort of the solving the problem kind of stage. But we think we can do some stuff with creating public funds, as in mutual funds or trusts, with effectively zero cost overhead, because we don't care about the cost of making money on the fund, that aggregate this play up and roll it into a mutual fund that average Joe can invest in with their 401k or their cash or whatever. And we don't envision doing that like sort of across our company as like an index fund or something. We envision doing it more sort of sector specific. So we might do a fund for all the clean tech M&A stuff that we do in North America. And we might do a fund for all of the aviation stuff that we do anywhere in the world, and like wrap them up in sort of these buckets that we can then package for retail and make available.
But then aren't you centralizing it again? So rather than an investor being able to go directly into that SME and benefit on a profit participation or whatever it might be, then you're taking that away by putting them into a fund, and then there's rules and the regs around that fund?
There are rules and regs around the fund, and it is not the same as going into an individual company. Like, until the regulatory environment catches up, there's just no way to make that legally happen. But it gives them access to these SME deals, even if it is sort of spread across a number of different asset classes in a way that they can't get today. So it's not a magic bullet, and it's not the end game, but I think it's the next step.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you, Chris. I think it's a very interesting topic, and I'm in a very similar business of structuring funds and certificates around that, more on the financial institution classic way. So interesting to see. What I wonder is exactly the regulatory topic. You said you have about 500 millions in deals upcoming, but you can't close the deals without having the investors. So where are you getting the investors from without doing kind of a distribution to, because typically these kind of deals are limited to qualified investors. That's
Yeah, everything we do is private market. It is limited to private and to qualified investors in whatever jurisdiction they happen to be in. And we had no intention of going and building a giant global sales force. So for us, it's just taking advantage of the existing sales infrastructure, right? So we are going and building a already quite large and growing network of brokers and dealers, wealth managers, financial advisors that then sell these on directly to their clients. And actually, quite by accident, that worked out to be pretty magical for us and result in this sort of virtuous cycle, because the wealth managers and the financial advisors, their clients as the investors, these sort of mass affluent people, those people also are the CEOs and small business owners that are running these businesses around the world. And so they take our deals out, sell them to their clients, but they're also the ones that are the project sides come to for initial advice. Hey, I need to raise capital. I want to do XYZ. How do I do it? If they can't find a way to do it, now those wealth managers know about us. They bring the deal back to us, and it results in this great circle of investment and deal flow that goes round and round and round. And it's actually really interesting because it works. It's funny, the sort of deals that we're getting, because it's not just small independent wealth managers. Like I keep talking about this underwater submarine deal. And that one's really funny because Santander brought it to us. And Santander came and said, hey, can you guys do this deal? Now, here's the deal. There's a multinational company in the UK, multi-billion-dollar corporation. They have subsidiaries all over the world. They have a subsidiary in the US that manufactures these underwater exploratory drones. They cost like $10 million each. They have a subsidiary in Portugal that wants to buy 3 of these drones and operate them as a service. So, hey, US company, you've got a leasing agent. Can you lease these to this company over in Portugal? U.S. leasing company? Are you out of your mind? That's Europe. No, we don't. Go away. Like, we only deal with the U.S. We're not leasing to anybody in Europe. What are you talking about? Okay, fine. Portuguese subsidiary. Hey, can you get a loan from your bank to just borrow against these things? Santander. You do 45 million euro a year in revenue, and you want to borrow 36 million US for these 3 drones and operating costs? Get out of my office. No, we're not doing that. Parent company in the UK. Ugh, sorry, we're not in Europe anymore, but we'll happily write a guarantee for the 36 million. Us, we'll take that guarantee from Mr. Multinational Company and make this happen all night long. No issue at all. So it's all these weird deals that just can't get done by traditional infrastructure that we can do today.
Chris, thank you so much for coming back.
My pleasure, Julie.
As usual, very insightful. You're always one to watch. I think there's lots of partnership deals. We're looking forward to being part of that global distribution and partnership network that you're putting together. So thank you. Please thank Chris Richardson.